So it's a pleasure for me to introduce our guest for today's talk, Helmut Weiß and Farbod Khouzani from Goethe-Universität of Frankfurt. Helmut Weiß is full professor of historical German linguistics, and he's one of the leading scholars in the field of German syntax and its diachronic development. His research spans a wide range of topics, including syntax of German dialects, morphosyntactic variation, complementizer agreement, and pronominal systems. He is also well known for his seminal works on Bavarian syntax. In particular, we mentioned the monograph Syntax des Bayerischen, Studien zur Grammatik einer natürlichen Sprache, which has become a key reference for the syntactic analysis of Bavarian dialect and Upper German varieties. And in addition, he contributed to large-scale projects such as the Syntax Hessische Dialekte, which investigate the syntactic structure of Hessian varieties and makes its data and results freely accessible to an online platform for both specialists and general public. Our second speaker, Farbod Khouzani, is a doctoral researcher, so PhD candidate in the linguistic department of the same university. His research focuses on historical morphology and syntax, with particular emphasis on the diachronic development of negation in German. His doctoral work investigates Jespersen cycle, examining the emergence, distribution, and interaction of negation markers across historical stages and different varieties of the German language. In today's talk, they will guide us through a detailed analysis of Jespersen's cycle in German, and they will be focusing on the contrast between the two negation markers, it and niht. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for nice words to introduce us and for the invitation, which gives us the possibility to present our material from a research project funded by the German Research Foundation. The title of the project is A Comparative Approach to the Mysteries of the Jespersen Cycle, and it consists of a German and an Italian part. Responsible for the Italian part is Cecilia Poletto, and I am responsible for the German part, and our scientific staff is Farbod Khouzani, which is with me here, and Tommaso Mattiuzzi for the Italian part. This project is part of a greater Sonderforschungsbereich, collaborative research center, CRC, on negation, the title Negation in Language and Beyond, NEC Lab, which consists of 15 projects which all investigate negation from various perspectives. For example, I am involved in another project on negative adjectives in language change, where we investigate why some adjectives in German are only possible when they are negated. For example, unaufhörlich, incessantly, which only exists in such negated form. The non-negated form, aufhörlich, is no word in German. Okay. Here you have all the projects listed. They are concerned, for example, with processing, like negation at the interface, or with the acquisition of language, of negation, and so on. Okay. Here you see the outline. I will first introduce the Jespersen cycle in general and then the cycle in German, and present then some problematic issues with the Jespersen cycle in German and draw some preliminary conclusion. Then Farbod will present his corpus study on ich and nicht and draw the final conclusions. Okay, the Jespersen cycle, it's a language change process during which the original standard sentential negation particle is strengthened by a secondary element which becomes the new standard negation particle, while the former negation marker disappears. Probably the most famous example is the French, the development of negation in French, where we have the development from ne to ne pas and pas, at least in some colloquial variants of French today. The cycle is described by Jespersen as follows. The original negative adverb is first weakened, then found insufficient, and therefore strengthened, generally through some additional word, and this in turn may be felt as the negative proper, and may then in course of time be subject to the same development as the original word. Now, why does it happen? The trigger for starting the cycle is for Jespersen that the original negative adverb is weakened and found insufficient. And this is meant by the addition of a strengthening word. And this strengthening word can maybe felt eventually as negative proper, and the original negative particle disappears. And then it could start a new round of the Jespersen cycle, which was the case with the in French, because the original negator ne in French was the result of a cycle in Latin. Given these three development stages, the Jespersen cycle is traditionally divided into three phases. Here, with the example of French, the first phase consists of ne, the second phase has a bipartite negation, ne pas, and the third phase, so negation, in this case, pas. Jespersen cycle has not only occurred in French, but also in many other languages. Another example is English, where we have originally a pre-verbal negator ne, which is in phase 2, strengthened by the addition of not, and this not is then felt to be the negation proper, and the original negation has disappeared. Here's a further example from an Italian dialect, Piedmontese, where the original, in phase 1, the original negation is no, which is then strengthened by nen. The nen is the bipartite negation, and the original negation disappears eventually, and only the new negator remains as in the modern Turin dialect. Okay. Now I come to the Jespersen cycle in German. German has undergone the Jespersen cycle as well. The standard negation mark, sentential negation marker nicht in contemporary German is regarded as the result of Jespersen as the secondary negative marker which have entirely supplanted the original preverbal negation ni. According to the phonological account proposed by Jespersen, the cycle started due to the lack of salience of the original negation marker ni, because the transition from Old High German to Middle High German is accompanied by a phonological weakening process, the so-called Nebensilbenabschwächung, weakening of secondary syllables. And as a result of which the full vowels in unstressed syllables were weakened to schwa and lost their qualitative distinction. And this resulted for the negation in forms like n, n, or n. Niht, the new negator, has its origin in the noun wicht, with a very general meaning. Meant something like thing, entity, creature, human, or people. And this wicht could also be used as an indefinite pronoun in Old High German and then referred to entities in non-veridical contexts, such as questions or within the scope of negation. It was equivalent to English anything. In some cases, the indefinite was reinforced by the adverb EU, which corresponds to modern standard German je, and this results in the indefinite EU-wicht, or later shortened to ich. The modern standard German nicht is the descendant of the negated form, nie EU-wicht, neo-wicht, or shortened eventually to nicht, and means something like not ever anything, or nothing ever nothing at all. The shift from nie to nicht in the history of German negation suggests a development on the following path, where we have these three phases of the Jespersen cycle. Phase one with preverbal negative particle ni, phase two with the bipartite negation ni plus nicht, and in phase three only nicht survives, and the original negation has disappeared. Phase one is traditionally associated with Old High German, and phase two with Middle High German. Here are concrete data from Old High German, Middle High German, and Modern German, which illustrate the development. Phase one, ne weiß, not know. Then in Middle High German, the Middle High German has a bipartite negation. Konnte es nicht verändern. He could not accomplish it. The N and nicht is here the negation. And in Modern German, only nicht negates the sentence, and the original negation nie has disappeared. So according to this data, the Jespersen cycle in German can be illustrated here, the three phases I presented. However, this traditional view on the development of negation in German has been problematized in some respects. For example, or first of all, since Agnes Jäger has shown that the phase two with the bipartite negations and phase three with the new negation only cannot clearly be separated chronologically in German, as uses corresponding to phase three are attested almost at the beginning of phase two. Here are examples from the Nibelungenlied, where both constructions occur. We have sentences negated by the bipartite negation. Ich will es nicht erwinden. With N and nicht as negators, but we have also sentences where the only negator is nicht, corresponding to phase 3. And that means that phase 2 and phase 3 both occur in the same text. On the other hand, our data have shown that the pre-verbal negation marker ni could have been strengthened by another element from the very beginning. And this suggests that phase 1 and phase 2 also cannot be clearly separated. Here is an example, examples from a late Old High German text, Memento Mori, where we have ne Weiß as a soul negator, but we have also sentences like where ne and niht are present with this bipartite negation. That means that phase 1 and phase 2 occur both in the same text. And these data indicate that there is no evidence for a stable phase 2 in German, not only in comparison to phase 3, but also in comparison to phase 1. Phase 2 has always overlapped with phases 1 and 3. And this refutes the traditional assumption that Old High German should be regarded as a period of phase 1 and Middle High German as the period of phase 2, since the continuous negation also occurred in Old High German, and phase 3 can already be traced back to the Middle High German. Another issue is why it started. The original explanation of Jespersen is that the original negator is weakened phonologically and then have to be strengthened by another element. However, as illustrated in the following examples, pre-verbal negation in Old High German was not solely strengthened by neo-wicht, but also by other elements such as wicht or sar. Sar means quickly at all. And these examples show in 7 the wie mark manner how it helfen hereren wicht. In that the servants cannot help the Lord at all. Nie and wicht as bipartite negation or as strengthened negation. And in the second sentence, sar nie wisses, do not know me at all. Here is sar, strengthener of the negative particle nie. And the interesting thing is that the original negator appears here in a non-weakened form. It has its full vowel and could nevertheless be strengthened by another element. So the phonological weakening cannot be the trigger to start the Jespersen cycle. The observation that ni has always been, at least optionally strengthened, despite its full form in the history of German, suggests that there cannot be a phase 1 either, and phonological weakening cannot have been the exclusive trigger for Jespersen cycle. An alternative view has been proposed in the literature. The cycle is driven by the loss of emphasis of marked structures, for example, by Kipalski and Kondorovsky. They wrote the cycle is not about the phonetic weakening of the negation, but the semantic weakening of emphatic negation. The same view is expressed by Johann van der Auberer. If speakers overuse the emphatic strategy, the latter may lose the emphatic effect and become as neutral as the simple strategy. Our hypothesis, which we have in the project, that there are different functions are encoded in the negative systems. Different functions as plane negation, domain widening, cancellation, polarity focus, and so on. And in a negative system with such an array of functions, different steps in the cycle, in the Jespersen cycle, correspond to changes in which items express which function. And the evolution of new negators within the system involves multiple factors. In addition, it is not possible to speak of Old German as a single language. The most significant distinction is that between Old High German and Old Low German or Old Saxon. But Old High German is also distinguished by the existence of various dialects, each of which exhibits distinct characteristics and development trajectories with respect to different linguistic phenomena. And in consequence of phenomena such as the Jespersen cycle should be investigated not only diachronically, but also diatopically, given that the progression of the cycle in different areas, dialects, does not necessarily coincide synchronically. Such a diachronic diatopic study has already been conducted by Daniel Urbeck and Oliver Schallert, so for Middle High German. They divided the data into the following areas, as East Upper German, West Upper German, East Middle German, and West Middle German. And they investigated the dialects diachronically between 1150 and 1350 at intervals of 50 years. And the results in numbers are given in the table below. The main results are that the discontinuous negation is lost most quickly in Upper German. In East Upper German, there is a very slight majority for phase 2 already for phase 2 in 1150 and to 1200. Both East and West Upper German show a majority for phase 3 by the beginning of the 13th century, and the development of the Jespersen cycle is delayed in West Middle German, where niht is the majority variant until the mid of the 14th century. Interestingly, in East Middle German, there seemed to be a drastic leap towards niht, towards phase 3 within 50 years, and has entered phase 3 by the 14th century class. As you can see here, between the second half of the 13th century, both construction occur equally, but in 50 years later, the vast majority is niht alone in this respect. Okay. Now I come to the preliminary conclusions. There's no stable phase 2 in German, and there can be no stable phase 1 either, as preverbal negation could always be strengthened by a secondary element from the beginning. And phonological weakening cannot be the trigger for a Jespersen cycle, as ni was already strengthened in its original form with the full mouth. Then it is not possible to speak generally of the Jespersen cycle in German, as the progress of the cycle diverges diachronically and diatopically and should be treated separately for different dialectal regions. That is, there was more than one Jespersen cycle in German. The Jespersen cycle does not necessarily have to consist of 3 stable phases, clearly separated from each other, but the replacement of the original preverbal marker by the secondary one could be regarded as a spectrum within many overlaps. And finally, the Jespersen cycle does not necessarily have to be seen as the replacement of the original plain negation by a strengthener, but rather as the shifting of the elements with respect to their function within a negative system, for example, from emphatic negation to plain negation. Now, Farbod will present his corpus study.
So now I'm going to tell you something about ich and nicht in German. And so if we take German, for example, we can see that the Jespersen cycle has not only happened with nicht in German, we have had many different elements that have been in competition during the Jespersen cycle throughout the history of German. One of these elements is ich, the non-negated form of nicht. And the history of ich shows that several cycles can take place simultaneously and compete with each other in a language. And the second thing it shows is that not every cycle can successfully prevail in long term. So some of them may just disappear. And something about the historical development of ich itself. So from the literature, we already know that ich or ich has been a negative polarity item, like the English anything. So in non-veridical context or NPI contexts, like, let's say, negation, conditional clauses, final clauses, and so on. And but similar to the negative indefinite nicht, ich has also been increasingly used as a negation marker, sentential negation marker during the Middle High German period. But at the end, it was completely displaced by the negative form nicht, let's say in most of the dialects, but still in some contemporary Upper German dialects, like in some Bavarian varieties, in Southeastern Swabian and Northeastern Swiss dialects, we still find those that have grammaticalized it or et as successors of ich to their sentential grammar negation particles. Like in Swabian German, where you have something like this it say, it in the meaning of nicht, nothing, or not, sentential marker, so with the meaning that's not possible, or that cannot be. But some information on polarity items in general before we go into the details of ich. So according to literature, we can have some polarity items that are sensitive, let's say, to the polarity or entailment of the context in which they occur. If we want to give a kind of definition to these elements and divide them in groups, we would have something like positive polarity items on one side that are expressions that cannot happen in negative context, but on the other side we have the negative polarity items that are expressions that can only appear in negative contexts. So they need something to, let's say, license them to happen in these contexts. Like, for example, the English PPI, NPI pair still yet. If we compare them, something that is a PPI like still can only happen in positive sentences like John is still at home, but it cannot happen like in free, for example. John is still not at home. Whereas the other one, the NPI, cannot happen in non-negative context, like in B, John is at home yet, is grammatically not explicit. And we need a negative context to be able to use this element, something like John is not at home yet. However, the distribution of the PIs in general is not really straightforward. It cannot be predicted 100%. So there are different classifications in the literature how it could be predicted or how those could be classified, like etymological classifications, semantic ones, and so on.
but since it's not the main subject of what is following, I'm not going to go into details more, but if there are any questions at the end, I could answer to them. And the German indefinite system is also something important we should look at before we go into the corpus study. If we compare the indefinite system of German and English with each other, the contemporary languages, we can see that the English system is some kind of more complex. We have at least 3 different forms for all of the indefinite pronouns, whereas in German it's not the case. So we have a bipartite one for German and a tripartite one for English, nowadays English. If we take, for example, the indefinite pronoun for entities, we can see that we have a negative one in German, nicht, and a non-negative one, etwas, that can be used in all other non-negative contexts, regardless of their NPI, PPI features. But in English, it's not the case. So if you have a PPI context, we need something. If it's an NPI context, anything. And in negative, explicitly negative, classically negative context, we use nothing. But this was not always like that in German. If we look at Old High German, we can see that it also displayed a tripartite system with PPI context, NPI context, and negative context, like using, for example, etwas for PPIs, Iowicht for ich, which is our investigated element in the NPI context, and Neowicht that later become the standard sentential marker in modern standard, most of the dialects at least, was the negative one. And during the Middle High German, there were some changes in the use of these elements. As you can see by the different arrows, the changes went in both directions, like NPIs that were used also in PPIs, or PPIs also used for NPIs, and also NPIs that were used in negative contexts. And again, if you look at the indefinite pronoun for entities, we can see that in German, etwas broadened its use also to NPI contexts, and nicht was still used for the negative context, but we can also see that ich also broadened its use to negative contexts, resulting in the system we have nowadays, etwas for non-negative ones and nicht for negative ones, and in some dialects, it for negation in those dialects. But now to the corpus study. So in our corpus study in general, we have looked into different groups of dialects. Let's say those that use nicht in their contemporary versions, we call them the nicht dialects, and those that use those, let's say, Upper German dialects that use it or et, these different forms that are successors of ich, as their sentential negation marker as ich dialect. So it just refers to, let's say, their today's version, if it's a nicht dialect or an ich dialect. Because as you will see, ich is actually used in many more dialects during the Middle High German period for sentential negation. So we could not just classify them based on their situation in Middle High German. And there explicitly we will let's say investigate the occurrence of ich in different dialects. We want to see if ich really occurs in all of the dialects or only in the ich dialects, and if in both, to what extent it's different. Like, does it happen more in ich dialects, which is the result for being grammaticalized, or there's no difference? And on the other hand, if it happens in all of the dialects, if there are any differences in its behavior regarding its, let's say, functional or syntactic distributions, to see if those differences could be, let's say, regarded as crucial factors for its grammaticalization in some dialects and its extinction in the others. And for this, we have used, for this part of the corpus study, we have used the reference corpus of Middle High German. It's, let's say, corpus with many tokens, over 2 million tokens, and includes many texts from the Middle High German period. And most of them are annotated already. And for this, we have used the lemma ich, because at this period, there's not any standard orthography for the writing of the words yet, so you could find ich in many different forms. So to catch them all, we were obliged to use the lemma to be sure that all of them are included. And again, we looked both for texts, like, let's say, because at this part of the study, we're focusing on Thuringian. If you can, like in the red spot, you can find the Thuringian region, where nowadays Thuringian is spoken, and its surrounding dialects, let's say, to see if ich happens in those, because those dialects are dialects that belong to the niht group. So they use niht nowadays and no ich. So that's why we're looking into those dialects during the Middle High German to see if it happens already there or not anymore. So Thuringian itself has many different varieties again, like North Thuringian, South Thuringian, and so on. But it is also surrounded by different dialectal groups like Hessian dialects or Franconian dialects and so on. What we have done is looking not only into that area to catch all the texts or attestations that come from that region, but also to the text language. So both filters, like, because sometimes you have manuscripts from other regions that include some texts that are also associated with Thuringian. So we looked also in both of them. And the result, let's say, was that not all of them could be also associated only to Thuringian. Some of them could be associated with two different, so it's not really clear. It could be Thuringian, but it could also be Hessian. So we will see how the results are. So in total, we found 73 different results with ich in them. The earliest attestation was from the 12th century, and the last one we found from Middle High German was from the second half of the 14th century. But if you look into the details, you will see that there are really attestations from different years. But if you want to group them into bigger groups to be able to talk about them in a more general way, we can say we have examples from the 13th century and those from the 14th century. And if you look at the dialectal distribution, we can see that there are examples from Thuringian, or those that can be associated with Hessian or Thuringian, but also those that could be associated with Thuringian and Upper Saxon. But we can also see that we had attestations from dialects like Hessian and Rhine-Franconian or Hessian, so attestations that could be associated with both of them. So if we look at the syntactic functions that ich had in those dialects, we can see that it could be used both as an argument and as an adjunct, like as an adverb. Those argumental uses are where it showed up, like, let's say, as an indefinite pronoun, something like the example in 7. Und da sollen alle die kommen, die ich zu fordern haben und zu klagen drum. And that is where all those should go who have anything to demand and complain about. So here it is used as an argument, as an indefinite pronoun in an NPI context, but it could also be used as an adverb or a particle, let's say in German, like in some questions like, tun das ich offenbare Sünder? Do obvious sinners do this at all? So like a kind of rhetorical question. But it was also used in some contexts with an ambiguous function, where it could both be interpreted as an argument or as an adverb, both of them. Like if you take this example, wie mochten wir dann, gnädige Frau, dich das Kreuz ich berichten? So it could be interpreted as an indefinite, like how then, madam, could we tell you anything about the cross? Or as an adverb, how then, madam, could we even tell you about the cross? So both of the interpretations were possible in this case. So it's used ambiguously between argument and adverb. And if you look at the whole data, you will see that most of the uses are as an argument. But there are a lot of, let's say, I'm not sure if it's not so significant. Like you have also a lot of examples where it's used as an adverb. But we also have these two examples where it was used ambiguously. And if you look at the development from the 13th to 14th century, you cannot really find any trends, because there's a big up and down. Like sometimes the argumental use was more, and then sometimes again the adverbial one, so you cannot really find a pattern. And if we compare that to the ich dialects, where ich has grammaticalized to a sentential marker, like from other parts of the study. So don't be confused if I talk about them. So these results are from another part of the story, and I'm just comparing the results from this study from nicht dialects with those that we had already with the ich dialects. So these ones, the nicht dialects, are those that are investigated in this part of the study compared to those that we had from the ich dialects using it. We can see that it's very similar, like 54% argumental use and 53. The only difference in this part is that in nicht dialects, you have some ambiguous cases, whereas in ich dialects, there are no ambiguous cases at all. So it's always definitely clear if it's used as an argument or as an adverb. And if you look at the development of ich in those dialects, although it's only until the end of the 12th century because the study is still running, so we only have the results until the end of the 12th century, but already there you can see that it goes up as an adverb and the argumental use decreases. But then it again goes in another way, which is some kind of surprising, but since it's only until the end of the 12th century, I'm pretty sure that it would go up again, because at the end of the day it is used as an adverb and then as a sentential marker in those dialects. So it's not really complete. It will be completed in next in the following, like during the study. But there are also different functions of ich, like used, as you've seen, as an indefinite pronoun or as an adverb and so on. And in total, there are 5 concrete different uses of ich in those dialects. So we can see ich still used as a noun with its original meaning, creature, being, people, something like that. So if you have something like das sechste, Gott, der mag aus nichte ich machen. 6, God, he is able to make being out of nothingness. So here it is used as a noun with the meaning of being something. But it could also be used as a positive indefinite pronoun, as in the example that we had already. So who have anything to demand. But it could also be used as a negative indefinite pronoun, surprisingly. So like nicht. Something like here, vor was sündige nicht mehr, auf das, dass dir ich Böses geschehe. Henceforth, sin no more, hoping that nothing bad will happen to you. So here it's used argumentally as an indefinite pronoun, but with a negative semantics. It could also be used as an adverb, something like here, fürchtete ich das Kreuz ich ne lobete das Kreuz nicht. If I feared the cross, in the least, I would not praise the cross. So here it is used as an adverb, but it could also be used as a sentential negation marker, already I said. Something like here, ihr Herren, habt ihr euch noch nicht ich bedacht, but with the meaning of nicht. Sentential marker, so gentlemen, have you not made up your minds yet? But again, here there are some ambiguous cases where you cannot concretely say if it's used like as an adverb or indefinite pronoun. One of them we already had. How then, madam, could we even tell you about the cross or tell you anything about the cross? But there are also other ambiguous functions, like in this case, in case of questions where you could have 2 different polarities. It could be used or interpreted as an adverb, but it could also be interpreted as a negation marker again. Something like, wisset ihr ich, wie das geschah? Do you even know how that happened? Or do you not know how that happened? Both could be interpreted in this context. Mostly it's in the context of the questions where polarity does not really change the interpretation or logical meaning, let's say, of the proposition. And we also have ambiguous cases where it could be interpreted either as a negation particle, so it's intentional negation, or as a negation strengthener. So just for instance, strengthening as a strengthening with negation already. And in this case, da mochten sie viel komme wieder dem Strom ich gefahren. And depending on how you would interpret komme here, because it could mean something like both partly or nearly. Both of them could be possible. And depending on how or which interpretation of kaum you would take in this case, you would have something like negation strengthening, something like then they could hardly go against the flow at all. Or if you take the other meaning, very nearly, could not go against the flow. So depending on your interpretation or reading, you could have either negation particle or negation strengthener. And again, if you look at the whole data, we will see that a lot of functions are those as an indefinite pronoun, but also many as a negation particle, sentential negation. And again, a lot of them as an adverb and ambiguous functions that we have, but also some as a negative indefinite, as you've seen. And if we look at the development of these uses from the 13th to 14th century again, we can see that actually almost all the functions have decreased from 13th to 14th century. Only those with a negative semantics have increased or emerged even in the 14th century. So the one as a negative particle or the one argumentally used as a negative indefinite that emerges during the 14th century first. So here again, if we compare that with the ich dialects, we can see, okay, there are a lot of, let's say, similarities, but the use of ich as a negation particle and negative indefinite is already much more frequent in the ich dialects, already in this, by the end of the 12th century. Here you can see there are a lot of uses with the negative semantics, but here it's less. And again, you can see that we had a lot of ambiguous cases, 7%. But in the ich dialects, already by the end of the 12th century, the uses are clear, concrete. There are no ambiguous cases in this regard. Now to the semantics of ich itself. So it could be used positively with a positive semantics, or with a negative one, or ambiguous ones. Positive functions were those like used as a noun or as an indefinite pronoun, as an adverb, or ambiguous cases where it could be interpreted both as an adverb and indefinite. Negative ones are those used as a negative indefinite pronoun, negative particle, or sentential marker, or the ambiguous case between negative strengthening and negation strengthening and negative particle. One ambiguous case where the questions where it could be both interpreted as an adverb or as a negation in the sentence. And if we compare those, we can see that most of the uses are actually in a positive way with a positive semantics. But there are still a lot of negative uses too. But mostly, like more than 65% of the uses are with a positive semantics, and only, let's say, 35% are ambiguous or negative. And if you look at the development here in this case from 13th to 14th century, you can see that the uses of negative semantic have increased, and those with a positive one decreased, but still the positive ones are predominant. Compared with the ich dialects, again, we can see that it's totally different in those dialects. Ich dialects show more negative uses, as you can see here. And again, here there are no ambiguous cases. Already by the end of the 12th century, also that is already settled. And if we look at the development of these dialects, the uses in these dialects, we can see that similar to the niht dialects, also here the negative use has increased and the positive one has decreased. But in this case, at the end of the by the end of the 12th century, the negative uses already outnumber the positive ones. So this was not the case here. Here, still the positive ones are predominant. But here, the negative ones already outnumber the positive ones. And there are also other distributions, syntactic distributions, so the context in which ich happens in these dialects. Here we can see that we have mostly ich in the conditional context, followed by final clauses and interrogative clauses, questions, but also in negative contexts. So contexts that already contain a negation mark. And also in some other embedded clauses like relative ones, modal ones, temporal ones, consecutive ones, and some other like, yeah. And those das sentences, das is the word, the Middle High German word for that, with a lot of meanings actually, but those are the, let's say, neutral that sentences, like as a subject clause or as an object clause, without any other meaning. And here, if you look at the development, we can see that it has also changed. In the 13th century, mostly we have conditional clauses, but in the 14th century, we have mostly final clauses. So it has changed. And then we can see that there are two contexts that have emerged in the 14th century. Those das clauses and the consecutive ones. But they have a problem because we said ich was actually an NPI. And if we take those contexts, these are not really typical contexts that could license NPIs. So the input, let's say, is not downward entailing or non-veridical to be able to license an NPI. Of course, the use of ich has caused that at the end, the output is non-veridical due to the meaning. Because if we look at the uses here, we can see if we put the different uses regarding the semantic polarity of ich, we can see that those cases only happen with ich, used with a negative semantics. So it was only able to be used in non-NPI contexts if it already had a negative meaning. So with its typical meaning as an indefinite and so on, it was only 100% used in NPI contexts. So as you can see here, the positive uses are 100% in NPI context. Even the ambiguous ones are in negative or in NPI context. Only those negative contexts or negative meanings are able to happen in other contexts that are originally not licensing NPIs. And if we compare those again with the ich dialects, we can see that it exactly happens in the same context in both dialect groups. And in both dialect groups, again, negative, interrogative, conditional, and final clauses make up 75 to 80% of the data. And non-negative or non-NPI contexts make up to 7% in both dialects. You can see here and here, again, non-NPI. So these here in the last part of the study, they were called non-NPI contexts. Here they're separated by das and consecutive sense. And again, here you can see that it was only used with a negative semantics in both dialect groups within the non-NPI context. But surprisingly, this use has spread to more different dialects, let's say more in niht dialects than in the ich dialects. But again, we have to consider that it's only until the end of the 12th century. So we assume that it would also spread to other contexts in those dialects, because at the end of the day, it has spread to all the contexts when it has become the sentential negative marker in those dialects. So if we want to come to a, let's say again, preliminary conclusion, we could say that surprisingly, ich also occurred in niht dialects, and surprisingly very frequent also. And so we had the different varieties that are all niht dialects, like Thuringian, Upper Saxon, Hessian, and Rhine-Franconian. The only differences were like concerning the argumental versus adverbial distribution here. So we had no clear trends in the niht dialects, whereas we had a rising trend for adverbial uses in the Ich dialects, but only until the end of the 12th century. And then again, we had displaying, those were displaying 3% of ambiguous uses, which was not the case in the Ich dialects. Regarding the functional distribution, we have seen that niht could be used as a noun or with ambiguous functions in the niht dialects, but in the Ich dialects, at least in those cases, let's say, or in what we have found until the end of the 12th century, we could not find any uses as a noun, and there were also no ambiguous functions. With respect to their semantics, niht dialects have shown more positive uses, 65, and less negative uses, whereas in Ich dialects we had more negative uses and less positive ones. Again, we had some ambiguous cases within the niht dialects, but there were no ambiguous cases at all within the Ich dialects. And chronologically observed, the positive use remains predominant in the corpus in the niht dialects, but already by the end of the 12th century, it outnumbers the positive uses in the Ich dialects. The syntactic distribution is actually always the same. All happened in the same dialects. Like, let's say in niht dialects, it was mostly used in conditional clauses, whereas in Ich dialect, it was mostly used in final clauses. But as you have seen, the development in the niht dialects went also in the same direction. So in the 14th century of the niht dialects, we've also seen that those uses in final clauses have increased. And concerning the, let's say, NPI-hood of the context in which it happened, we can see that the share of non-NPI contexts amounts to 18% of all negative uses in the niht dialects, whereas it was only 11% in Ich dialects, surprisingly, but we said, okay, it's still only until the end of the 12th century. It will increase probably also in those dialects. And thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. Now let's move on. Okay, now, is there any questions? Remote participant go usually first. Okay. So, Cecilia?
Yes, thank you for the talk. I was wondering whether you have found any differences between the two types of variants in terms of adverbial usages with respect to the direct object. Because Anne Breitbart notices that for Low German, actually the first cases in which you use nicht are those where the verb is an intransitive, so it doesn't have a direct object. And this is also confirmed by Joseph Bayer in his work on nicht in Bavarian. And the same is true also for Old Italian and generally Italian varieties that you can use, you know, things like in Italian, non ho dormito niente, meaning I didn't sleep at all. But if you try to use it with a transitive verb, it's much stranger. And maybe, you know, there could be a difference between the two variants that you were looking at, so that those that you then in the end developed nicht didn't use it all that much, while the others with ich that now have ich were already more progressive, just like, you know, the thing you were showing with the nouns. Thank you.
Okay, I would say, like for the beginning, the association with the negation happens with the, let's say, verbs that need an accusative, where it is used like as a pseudopartitive, where it is used as a domain widening, let's say, element to reinforce the negation. But later, we have two types of the verbs or structures in a sentence where we could say it's either ambiguously or concretely used as an adverb and with that meaning of negation. And those were either as you said, verbs that cannot have any accusative, where we were completely sure that it is used as an adverb in this case, or verbs that need an accusative, but there is already another accusative in this sentence, so that other one could not be another accusative as well, because it's also not interpreted as a, let's say, logical argument of the verb at all. So in those cases, we were also sure it's used adverbally. In most of those cases, it's used to either strengthen the negation, or it's even used solely to mark the negation. So yes, I would say it plays a role which verbs and which construction. Even if there is a verb with an accusative, it's very important to see if there is already one or not.
Other questions?
Well, I have a general question connected to, it's more marginal with respect to this, and it's connected with the use of nicht in German. Is the development of nichts connected with this use of ich or nicht, or does it follow another path?
No, it's connected because as nicht developed into a negation particle, it could not any longer function as accusative form or as a case-marked form of nicht, the indefinite pronoun. And then the original genitive form nichts steps in and takes over the case-marked form of nicht, and it can be used now as in a nominative context or accusative context and so on. So the development of nichts as is a case in different form is correlated or is dependent on the development of nicht into a negation particle.
Maybe if I want to add something to that, even with ich, if you look into the data, you will see that when it's used as an adverb, it's always used in its accusative form. So I could imagine even there, if it was supposed to go in the other direction, it wouldn't be possible anymore to use ich in that form anymore as an indefinite, because that would have another, let's say, function again. So both of them are used adverbally in their accusative form.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have just a methodological question. You used the term emergence when you presented your data. In which sense you intend emergence? I mean, if you see the phenomenon once, or at least the three context or something?
I would say it needs to be actually more significant, because it's only once. You could just speculate and say maybe it's the first one, let's say, and or maybe it's misinterpreted in that context. But no, of course, it needs to be more to see. There are also cases in which we were not sure, okay, how is it going to be interpreted? There were three, for example, different interpretations possible, like one of them with ich as a free choice element. But it was only this one attestation, so we could just speculate and say, okay, maybe that could also be have been used in this function in this context, because it was actually a non-NPI context, so there was no licensor there, and the negative meaning could somehow be forced into the interpretation as well. Yes. But we were like asking or wondering how is it possible for it to be there. So the only way to get out of that was like to see, okay, if there could be any free choice interpretation as well, and it was, but it could just only remain in a speculation because there are no other, and it's due to the lack of data actually. So yes. It's always like that with historical data, you cannot really get as much as you
That
want. You
was
just,
my point,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
From the distance.
Yeah.
Remote participants as well. Okay, so I think we can thank Helmut and Farbod once again. Thank you very much. And now the next meeting.
Yeah, let's announce
announcement.
next week's meeting. All right, it is a pleasure for me to invite you to next week Conversazioni Linguistiche on the 6th of February, which is a Friday from 12 p.m. as always. We'll have Giulio Imberciadori of the Ludwig Maximilians Universität München, who will hold a talk about the contatto linguistico nei Balcani, il lessico albanese dall'antichità ad oggi. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.